Everyone see me and the great. I can see you on the side, so thank you so much. Welcome to Homophobia Harms Everyone, Sexual and Gender Prejudice Through a Modern Lens. I'm Antony Osso. I think the best way to do this is to propose a few questions to get you thinking about these constructs. So if you want to open your notes app or grab a notebook or a Post-it note or something, I would really appreciate that because that'll help us, because we'll do a Q&A at the end. So first up, please take a moment. Oops. How did that happen already again? Hold on. Slideshow, play from start. No. Here we go. The first prompt question for you all. Take a moment and think of the word homophobia. What thoughts, images, and feelings come to mind? Visuals, thoughts, emotions, circumstances. I'll give you a few seconds there. Excellent. Thank you so much. So this presentation proposes three main points for consideration, three learning objectives. They are that the clinical definition and understanding of the construct of homophobia is reductive, outdated, and incomplete. That intolerance of homosexuality is an expression of existential anxiety informed by heterosexism that harms the intolerant individual, and that ethical treatment of clients requires self-reflection of counselors, education, intervention, assessment, and research. So to start, how is homophobia defined in the research? Weinberg coined it in the late 60s, and we could go back way in time before homosexuality was even a thing. It used to be that everyone was heterosexual and there was homosexual behavior. Then homosexual became an identity later, but that's before this presentation. So in 71, Weinberg published this on the left, the dread of being in close quarters with homosexuals. And in the case of homosexuals themselves, self-loathing. So he immediately was able to say external and internal. In 2008, they broadened it out, right, to the irrational fear and hatred of gay men and lesbians, combining obviously homosexual and phobia. So it refers to fear or panic regarding people who are homosexual. Audre Lorde in '88 brought up terror, a terror surrounding feelings of love for members of the same sex and thereby a hatred of those feelings in others. Pretty strong words. And you'll notice very feeling oriented, emotion oriented. Ventriglio in 2021 broadened it out, a range of behaviors, feelings, and negative attitudes towards sexual variations and people identified or perceived as LGBTQI. Now, I think that's important to mention that it's not only LGBT people, but also people who are perceived to be. So a lot of this is feelings oriented, isn't it? But I would like to say that tolerance comes into question here. Let's look at tolerance and intolerance for a moment. Oh, I just skipped something, sorry. Why is the term homophobia problematic? We're gonna get to tolerance in a second. The term homophobia is problematic. Plummer in 2005 laid this out really well. So phobias, I'm scared of spiders, I'm scared of heights. It's usually fear-based. It's associated with avoiding the thing you're scared of. It includes seeing one's fears as excessive or unreasonable. It doesn't classically relate to a political agenda, right? It's stop spiders. And people usually want to change. But homophobia is different. Homophobia is usually built on hatred or anger. It's associated with aggression. It's seen as justified. It involves prejudice and discrimination. It's part of a political process, right? and people usually see no need to change. So that's why I like the word intolerance. And of course, tolerance, its opposite. To me, homophobia has never quite only been a phobia, it's been an intolerance. Tolerance is the capacity to endure pain or hardship. These are from Merriam-Webster. Or it's a sympathy or an indulgence for beliefs differing from or conflicting with one's own. So different from me and also conflicting with what I believe. Intolerance is being unable or unwilling to endure. And now we're getting into it here. This is where I think it's really important to make this distinction. Unwilling to grant equal freedom of expression. Unwilling to grant or share rights, right? Bigotry. So I would say here, and I imagine you can guess where I'm going with this, right? I propose that homophobia is not a phobia, or at the very least, it's not only a phobia. And to deem it only a phobia is to undervalue the construct, which limits our capacity to comprehend it, identify it, and treat it. So what should we do? First, we should get our terms straight. No pun intended. Thank you, Eliza. These are some terms from the literature, and there are so many, but I would guess that you haven't heard a lot of these, or they're not showing up on a daily basis. So Herrick in 2004 tried to distinguish sexual stigma from homo-prejudice, from homo-negativism. Homophobia rolls off the tongue. It's easier. People are not walking around talking about homo-negativism. Then the subcategories, lesbophobia, biphobia. Transphobia needs its entire own presentation. So keep that in mind that to me, transphobia is a huge issue with a lot of overlap, but needs its own space. And then my personal favorite, I have to give a shout out to effeminophobia. First of all, what a word. But also I was a victim of effeminophobia in the 80s, in like 1988. Before I had any idea that I was gay or had any sexuality, something about my presentation triggered some people, right? Terror in the hearts of that which is different. So my lack of gender adherence to certain roles freaked people out. I didn't find a word for tomboyophobia, the other side of this, but I think that people, we can speculate as to why sporty girls are less terrifying than soft boys in 8th grade or what have you. On the right, Ventriglio named these in 2021, fairly recently. But we've thought about these concepts for a while. Homophobia in institutions, sponsored by the state, socially, and of course, internalized. So looking at this list, it may look big, right? Complete, but I'd like to propose some additions and focus on one term in particular. So first, homo-intolerance added to the bottom right corner. So if it's clear that what's been called a phobia for so long is actually an intolerance, it should be named as such. And I suspect that that same intolerance is part of the reason that the clinical research and study of this construct feels outdated and overly simplistic. We don't want to look too closely and pick apart something we're not comfortable naming, do we? We want to hold on to our homophobia. It's in every strata of our lives. Who's financing and publishing that? Who's choosing it and saying, let's name this more accurately? So that's, potentially up for debate, but I feel pretty strongly about that. Ventriglio on the right has those categories of homophobia. I would add religious homophobia because we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge all of the societal, cultural, and institutional sources of homophobia. And all of my queer clients to date, when talking about their difficulties coming out, and I'm not happy to say this, share the same refrain. I come from a religious family. Unfortunately, that's a shorthand, right? For rejection, ostracization, shaming. So, I propose heterosexism and homo-intolerance. Gregory Herrick has done a ton of work on homophobia, and this is completely indebted to him, and I have a lot of work of his to continue to get into. But to quote him, he says heterosexism is the cultural ideology that perpetuates sexual stigma by denying, denigrating, denying and denigrating any non-heterosexual form of behavior, identity, relationship, or community. It's inherent in cultural institutions, such as language and the law, through which it expresses and perpetuates a set of hierarchical relations. Herrick goes on to say that in that hierarchy of power and status, everything homosexual is devalued and considered inferior to what is heterosexual. Homosexual and bisexual people. I would add gender nonconforming people, androgynous people, same-sex relationships. I would add queer polyamorous relationships, non-monogamous relationships, communities of sexual minorities. I would add the kink community, the BDSM community, drag queens even. They're kept invisible, and when acknowledged, they're denigrated as sick, immoral, criminal, or at best, suboptimal. And that really hit me because I realized that I'm a 50-year-old gay man, and I think it's still in me that being homosexual is suboptimal. Not criminal, not sick, not deranged, but suboptimal, less than optimal. So then homo-intolerance would be the interpersonal version of this, right? Heterosexism is systemic. It's in all of our systems. It surrounds us. And then homo-intolerance is our expression of it, our individual attitudes and beliefs that we express towards others and towards ourselves. And before you say, oh, things are so much better now, gay people are welcome everywhere, I would caution you. In many ways, things are better for sexual and gender minorities. But so much of this intolerance was taught to us as children, some of us decades ago, right? And it lingers within us unexamined as truth. So here we are at one version that I like. And please do your research and find your own. But to me, heterosexism is in our systems, interwoven. And homo-intolerance is within ourselves. And there's an external version and an internal version. You might say it's two sides of the same coin, right? Internalized heterosexism is, I believe that being straight is optimal. And internalized homo-intolerance might be the way, internalized homo-intolerance may tell me that my homosexuality, insufficient masculinity or femininity, or lack of gender adherence are so distressing as to become intolerable. And you don't have to be LGBTQ to have those feelings, right? Another prompt for you. Please take a moment and consider, what are the differences between homophobia and racism or sexism? Or classism or ableism? Can you think of any off the top of your head? Take a moment. So I came across this article a few quarters ago and I'm obsessed. Intolerance and Intolerant Personality Disorder. So in 2003, Mary Gwindon, Alan Green, and Fred Hanna at Johns Hopkins published an article proposing a new personality disorder, intolerant personality disorder. And it has not made its way into the DSM yet, as you know. But I really think there's a lot of value in this conceptualization and that we can apply so much of it right now, even without any kind of formal category. So intolerance is generally defined, as we just saw in Merriam-Webster, as being unable or unwilling to endure or accept the beliefs, perspectives of others. It also involves a lack of recognition and respect for the fundamental rights of others. They suggest that it becomes pathological when those rigid beliefs lead a person to suppress the quality of life of another person, and cause pain and suffering through the denial of liberty, equal rights, or freedom of expression. Oppression often accompanies intolerance. It's kind of intolerant thoughts, intolerant feelings lead to intolerant behavior, all the way from oppression, bullying, to violence. And you know, oppression can happen in line at the grocery store. It can happen in the classroom, between parent and child, not just institutionally. And if you wonder, as I do, why this hasn't been formalized by the powers that be, I hate to say it, but I invite you to consider that it might be for some of the same reasons that homophobia is so threadbare as a construct. So this article was really thorough, and they presented a taxonomy, a list of symptoms. Now, as you look over this taxonomy with me, you'll see that some symptoms may ring a bell, right? You'll be able to guess maybe which cluster intolerant personality disorder would fall under. So here we go. Rigid set of beliefs that assert the intrinsic superiority of one's own group based on race, religion, culture, gender, other things too, right? Ability, stuff like that. Lacks empathy for one or more populations. Is antagonistic and hostile toward one or more particular groups. Seeks to deny, block, impede, or cancel the advancement of someone that's part of a group that they perceive to be inferior. In addition, they use their power or other means to prevent free expression of contrary or intolerable ideas. They have a sense of entitlement, and they believe, I love this one because you know this phrase from another personality disorder, a sense of entitlement that others should recognize their superiority without commensurate achievements. They manifest a pervasive pattern of disregard, and they show lack of remorse and indifference to having hurt or restricted or maligned members of selective populations. Right? All the bells are ringing. Like other personality disorders, these characteristics have to endure and lead to clinically significant distress or impairment in important areas of function, right? Interpersonal relationship, the workplace, self-image. The pattern's stable, can be traced back to childhood, and it's not attributable to a consequence of another disorder or substance use. If you guessed, and I bet you all did, that this is most like antisocial or narcissistic personality disorders, I would say you win. But the difference is that it manifests towards a particular group or groups, not universally, right? The narcissist is better than everyone, but the intolerant person is better than them, and them. And remember, if the individual is uncomfortable stereotyping an entire, an entire population, it likely indicates a mindset in which monolithic groups exist in hierarchies. All of them are like this, all of us are like this. So, what do you make of intolerant personality disorder? If it were up to me, we would have a conversation now, but we'll try to save it for later. Do you find yourself thinking, well, we can't ask client to abandon all of their principles, all of their morals. Aren't they entitled to some intolerance? What's the difference between having values and being intolerant? Where's the line? Who decides where the line is? These are good questions. As counselors and as humans, we need to be able to distinguish between values, principles, preferences, tolerance, and intolerance. Here's a silly, simple example. A value might be, I believe monogamy is the best choice for romantic partnership. Intolerance might look like, all non-monogamous or polyamorous people are selfish, sex-crazed, immature, and will never have what monogamous people have. And I need to speak on it and act on it without provocation. The former is a personal belief built on values. They're not bothering anybody. The latter is a perversion. You know, perversion means to bend or twist. The perversion of that belief that stereotypes people who are different into one big bad group. Now, you might say, you know, most intolerant people are doing just fine. They have strong feelings, but otherwise they're living their lives. They didn't come into session to talk about their intolerance, but there's plenty of research out there about how intolerance impacts the intolerant individual. Intolerance can stem from existential anxiety associated with the uncertainties and mysteries of being alive. Who am I? Is it okay to be who I am? What am I doing here? Do I belong here? Suspicion and distrust are perceived as necessary protective factors against a threat of perceived harm. Intolerant caregivers can foster underlearning, which leads children to inherit intolerance. This blows my mind personally, because it's so easy to call someone ignorant, but to conceive of their issue as of underlearning, it can be so much more effective therapeutically. Intolerant individuals are often victims of underlearning. When a parent or primary caregiver issues absolutes about a group, the child, who's invested in trusting in the correctness and the completeness of the caregiver and their worldview, tends to believe them. It's crucial to their well-being that they believe them and trust them. In doing so, they miss out on the opportunity to learn for themselves what that population is actually like, and more important, that no population is uniform in its behavior, beliefs, values, or value, singular. Underlearning sounds like, well, my parents said those people are all bad, so I just avoid them. I challenge you all right now. Don't we have some group in our minds that our parents may have said something in passing about a population that threatened them or made them uncomfortable or that was associated with something negative? The intolerant also exhibit a restricted ability to empathize, interact, and socialize with others unlike themselves. It's associated with rigid forms of thinking, discomfort with ambiguity, a lack of mental flexibility. And I'm sure you all know there's a ton of research about how mental flexibility and adaptability are cornerstones of wellness. They also suffer from a lack of openness to experience and feelings of fear and uncertainty. Now, taken all together, do these characteristics sound like a recipe for wellness? Do clients who come in with some of this symptomology thrive? Can they? Could they? But the onus for dealing with heterosexism and homo-intolerance has fallen onto the LGBTQ plus community. And frankly, I feel that that's both unfair, why do I have to do all this labor, and ineffective. I'm not the problem. As counselors, we must acknowledge that intolerance harms the individual who is intolerant at their core. They are negatively impacted before their beliefs, feelings, and attitudes turn into oppressive behavior, microaggressions, bullying, or violence. You may think this formulation is radical, and I would agree, but that's because the meaning of radical is, quote, from the root, relating to the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching or thorough. I'm just saying we really have to get to the root, the root core of what's happening. So I'd like to ask you, what and who do you find intolerable? Take a moment and consider these topics in groups. This you don't have to share later, don't worry. Just think about it. Which do you have strong feelings about? Who do you disagree with but you find tolerable? You can let them live. Which of these do you find intolerable? Have you actively acted? Have you ever acted on that intolerance? A Facebook post, a protest, bullying. It's my hope that if we're able to explore and distinguish between a value or a preference and an intolerance, that we'll be able to identify them in clients too. Please take a moment. Yeah, that's a lot, right? We could just look at this for a long time and have quite a conversation about it. But the point is not what side are we on, right? The point is what do I tolerate and what do I find intolerable, and what is that line? And when does it start harming me? Okay, part 3. Please take a moment. How have we been trained to consider how heterosexism impacts our clients or our own worldviews? We talk about multiculturalism a lot in this program, but do we talk about heterosexism? How have we been trained, if at all, to treat homo-intolerance as counselors? Mary Gwindon and her colleagues wrote this in their Intolerant Personality Disorder article, and it really lit a light bulb for me. They wrote, to passively condone personality patterns indicative of intolerance is a serious flaw in the mental health system. And I have to say, I feel that we're still at risk today of condoning these patterns. But there is hope, because counselors can do better, starting right now. I believe that we as counselors must always start with self-reflection. We must engage with our biases, our upbringings, our worldviews, and become aware of what we bring into the clinical space. We should continue to educate ourselves about homo-intolerance and acknowledge that this is not just an issue to address with the occasional LGBTQ plus client. Remember, the spectrums of sexual orientation and gender expression are broad, they're wide, and what we've called homophobia for so long is also a disdain for people who present outside prescribed gender norms. Those people are not always LGBTQ plus. And sexuality is fluid over the lifespan. Just because a client comes in identifying as heterosexual or homosexual doesn't mean they'll leave that way. We can also proactively listen for intolerance in our clients' content and engage with it. We can educate them about how their intolerance harms them and compromises their well-being. We can use assessments to both measure severity of symptoms and to use the results to illustrate the issue to clients. And of course, I hope some of us will be drawn to doing research around these subjects. I mean, for me, this is something that will continue to interest me, just because it impacted me from such a young age. There are assessments out there that we can use, and you'll be familiar with this first one because we did it in multicultural counseling. Do you remember the tapping on the left or right, gay couple, straight couple, what words we were associating with what? These are some of the most vetted assessments out there. But as you can imagine, if the construct is underdeveloped, then the assessments are probably insufficient, right? That being said, if we familiarize ourselves with them and use the right ones when appropriate, we can help give clients some sense of their degree of intolerance, and we can also advocate for better ones. Because if you can reconceive of the construct, the assessment will be better. Okay, so Gwendon and her colleagues proposed, this was quite an article as you can tell, because they proposed a treatment protocol for intolerant personality disorder. I would argue that we can use these steps today with clients and that we can explore intolerance with people who have come in for a variety of issues, but who may be negatively impacted. So this includes these 5 steps: seeking therapeutic permission. We could ask, I would like to ask you a question or two about your viewpoints on this group. You don't have to change your beliefs. I'm simply seeking to understand. Create a nice open path for them to be able to feel comfortable expressing it. We could then follow by instilling a sense of necessity. We could ask, gosh, I wonder how your primary issues might be improved if we understand where these feelings are coming from. Through the use of role plays, restoring, empty chair, or CBT, we could rehabilitate empathy by locating the source of the belief and discrediting it or reframing it. I might even name underlearning here and give the client the opportunity to engage with their own sense of justice and of judgment, not just what they've inherited or been taught that they've never thought about how to examine. We can help enhance self-esteem and target a potentially inflated sense of self-esteem through cognitive restructuring, consciousness raising, or assertiveness training. We can show clients that they don't have to rely on the perceived and imaginary superiority of their group in order to justify their self-esteem. Finally, we must address existential and traumatic issues. Sometimes intolerance is defensive. There's one bad experience with one member of a group, and the trauma processing allows the person to blame the entire group and to judge the entire group based on that experience. So when the intolerance is defensive, we can help clients reconnect with feelings of alienation, abandonment, rejection, or abuse, and help them process that trauma. Multicultural and ethical considerations. Well, this is, multiculturalism, right, requires that counselors consider diverse perspectives. This to me is not a diverse perspective, it's my primary perspective, but for most of us, it's going to be a diverse perspective. But it also requires that we critique established models. I feel very comfortable to critique homophobia as a construct, and I have really been critiquing it since middle school. It just never made sense to me. And to be honest, something that's always bugged me is outdatedness. The reality is that disseminating information can take so long and requires that we go seek it out, but also it's often blocked by groups who resist science and progress, people who are invested in keeping things the same. And as pioneering computer scientist Grace Hopper once said, and this really resonates with me, the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, "We've always done it this way." We can't afford to keep doing it this way. Ethical considerations include non-discrimination, continuing education, and innovation. In addition, counselors must avoid obsolete and outdated instruments and concepts. That's what I've been talking about. I encourage you to engage with the theories, definitions, assessments, and interventions. Homo-intolerance has been siloed way too long as just an issue for those people to deal with. We all have to deal with it. By connecting the dots between existential anxiety, heterosexism, and homo-intolerance, and other forms of prejudice, clinicians can more effectively serve all clients. What I hope you'll take away. I want to go back to that for a second. Let's look at that again. This is really meaningful to me. By connecting the dots between existential anxiety, who am I? Am I allowed to be here? Am I entitled to be who I am? Heterosexism and homo-intolerance. Oh, those people make me uncomfortable. That whole group is a problem. Thank God I'm better than them. At least I have some sense of superiority over some group. And other forms of prejudice. I don't like those people or those people because they make me uncomfortable. I underlearned about them and I don't know how to interact with them and they scare me. All of that impacts our clients to some degree. And if we can name it, bring it to their attention and ask them about it, it can unravel. It's like a knot unraveling. We can effectively serve everyone. So, what I hope you'll take away. Heterosexism and homo-intolerance, my preferred terms, you can find your own, are nuanced constructs that have been given short shrift in the research and in our training. Homo-intolerance does not only negatively impact the LGBTQ plus community, it harms the intolerant individual as well. Not to mention that it harms the heterosexual people who present differently. Ethical counselors must investigate our biases. We must educate ourselves and clients, and we must explore homo-intolerance and its impact in the clinical space. A final thought. I had this thought in the shower. If we're lucky, our intolerance will only harm ourselves, but it is much more likely that our unexamined intolerance is harming our clients, colleagues, children, family, friends, community, and society right now. I recently came across this paper that I wrote in writing workshop at NYU in 1993. I did not remember this, but I chose this topic then. And as you can tell, I am still at it 32 years later, in the hopes that one day we can get to a presentation that looks more like this. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I have a bunch of references here. I have some resources as well. And for discussion, those questions that we had, if we want to start with that. If anyone's comfortable saying something about any of these prompts or anything in general. Gosh, it gets more fun as you go along, by the way. It starts a little rocky though. Who wants to break the seal?
I raised my hand, but I will unmute.
I would love everyone to unmute and have a conversation with me if you are willing. I would really appreciate it.
Tony, incredible, incredible conversation and presentation. It has been such a pleasure to watch you develop this over the last 2.5 years.
Eliza
Uh,
and I met in Bridge in summer 2023.
we're day one.
Day one.
Um, yeah, I love the clarification between homo-intolerance, homosexism and the value in this intolerant personality disorder. Um, I'm wondering how you might see these things apply specifically to maybe closeted queer people whose internalized homophobia, homo-intolerance is primarily affecting their own identity and development, and how any ideas you have around treating that intolerant personality disorder that is aimed directly towards oneself.
Hmm. Identity formation is one of my favorite subjects because I think that we expect people to just understand who they are and they want to be who they want to be in their lives with no consideration, just kind of waking up and knowing. Um, I think we're detectives to some extent in the clinical space. I think we listen for language, repetition, terms, points of view, and we ask. It's kind of the idea of, oh, I noticed when you talk about your neighbors, you always call them this or that or whatever. Like you bring something to their attention and then you ask them about it. And you ask it, so, instilling a sense of necessity right after, right? So you ask out of curiosity what they mean. I had a gay male client who had some really transphobic views. And I worked with him, and I was really nervous about how to work with it specifically, to name it, to call him out, to be offended. I wasn't offended. I think we have to let everyone be themselves in this space. But he brought them up a few weeks in succession, and then on his own said, I don't know what my problem is. I think my problem is they're just doing all of this so publicly, and I don't want to show anyone myself in transition. I don't want anyone to see me when I'm struggling to get to the next thing. And I thought that was so profound, and I felt very lucky that I didn't do very much other than antagonize him or make him defensive. But he came to that realization on his own. And we talked about it a little bit, and we talked about the fear of being seen, or the idea of having a social construct that has to exist and that people can't see behind the curtain. So that's one example, I guess, maybe. But this is not about walking in and manualizing, oh, we have to rid the world of intolerance and we have to approach it with every client. This is really about listening for clues, language, signs, I think. Does that answer?
Tony? Oh,
Hi,
so
Aileen.
hi. I have more feedback, if that's okay.
Please.
Um, I love your presentation.
Thank you.
I want you to understand like how impactful the work that you're doing and the constructs that you presented to us. What really hit me throughout this entire thing, and also as you were responding to Eliza, is how you're hitting and addressing the root. And it's so profound because you're not only hitting the root, it's like you said at one point, you end up helping everybody because there's layers to it. So that's something that really stood out to me and is very apparent. And I hope to see more work like this, especially from you in the future. Um, and I just want to know if you have like any other experiences like doing this work in session besides the one you just shared right now that stood out to you.
First of all, thank you very much. I mean, I think multiculturalism is so funny as a concept, right? Because it makes you think you have to include people who have been excluded. And in this case, and usually it's marginalized communities, but in this case, I'm saying, wait, we have to include the heterosexual community in acknowledging intolerance and how it affects them. So it's really kind of a reverse process, but it's the same process, which is multiculturalism is not only for marginalized communities. We have to teach everyone that they are part of a culture, whether they think about it or not, whether they are aware of it or not. So I've had a lot, my client base is not all queer, which is kind of surprising to me. I thought as a queer presenting clinician that I would attract all gay clients or even all gay men, but it's a wide range. Um, you know, and I had my very first client was a trans woman who we talked a bit about her own internalized transphobia, only in that her own conception of her transness was that she wanted to pass as a cis woman, and that her endless goal, surgery, presentation, makeup, all of that was to pass as a cis woman. And I asked, really out of genuine curiosity, I said, why do we value cis women more than trans women? Why can't you be the best trans woman who you can be and are? Is that less than? Are we trying to answer to cis men because we think they want cis women? And over several weeks, we talked about that, and it was really illuminating. And I was flying. I mean, this was literally month 1 and 2 of seeing clients. I was flying by the seat of my pants. And I was asking myself those questions at the same time, you know, this idea of suboptimal. And she was like, I don't know. You're right. I'm pretty fierce. And I'm like, you are. You know, and why is the goal to do something that is not you as opposed to doing something that is you? So that was really profound because it made me think about that too, you know, as, you know, because we learn, right, from our clients. So yeah, that was really a big one for me. I was so lucky to have her as my first client. Anything else, either about these prompts or in general?
Yes, definitely.
Tony, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, hi,
Go ahead,
Tony.
Leah. Hi, Tony. I can hold my space. Go ahead, Leah.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Tony, this is going to stick with me. So phenomenally done. I'm going to need to keep processing all that you've presented because it is just so in-depth and so important the way in which you presented this as something to bring into the counseling space in such an important way that I feel like I'm a little bit at a loss for words, truly, just because of how impacted I am from this presentation. It was just so phenomenal. And I'm curious if you'd be willing to share your slides in the chat so I could revisit them because there's such great content here and I want to go back to some of your references.
Yeah.
And truly, Tony, I started to well up a little bit at the full circle moment of, you know, a previous report you had done, bringing it to here and just knowing you through almost the entirety of this program, working together on many projects, just to see this today, to see you today, it hit me. So you really kicked this off so beautifully. And thank you so much for your thoughtful presentation.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Leah. Yeah, it's really been circling in my mind from a very young age because, as you can imagine, most queer youth are having a great time being their queer selves until something comes in from outside to say there's something problematic here. So I've been wondering, what is everyone else's problem for a long time? But do you feel like, Leah, do you feel like you could bring this, some aspect of this into your work in the, like, not immediately necessarily, but do you think you can imagine a way to integrate any of this?
100%. And what I really like most is it is so adaptable to really any othered community,
Yes.
visible or invisible. And I
Yes.
really like that part because that is such a pillar of really any client that we have. There is some sense of otherness in their world that the framework you provided around your presentation can easily be adapted to addressing any of these social issues and constructs that enter our space in a really tangible way.